There's this quiet moment that happens for a lot of people somewhere in their late 50s or 60s. It's usually not dramatic, no music, no alarms. You're sitting at the kitchen table, maybe early in the morning, coffee getting cold, and you're scrolling through your bank account or your retirement statement. Social Security came in a few days ago. The number looks fine, not great, not terrible, just fine. And then your eyes land on that retirement balance. About $250,000. At one point in your life, that number would have sounded enormous. Honestly, it probably did. There was a time when you thought, if I could ever save that much, I'd be set. But now it just feels fragile. You start doing that thing people do, the mental math. Okay, if I live another 25 years, maybe 30, healthcare costs keep going up, groceries aren't what they used to be, property taxes. What if the car needs replacing? What if something happens? And suddenly, $250,000 doesn't feel like security. It feels like a question mark. That's the moment I keep coming back to when I think about retirement. I'm Robert, and I spend a lot of time thinking about money, aging, and why certain numbers feel comforting on paper but unsettling in real life, especially once work starts slowing down and the paychecks stop showing up like clockwork. And what I've noticed over and over is that the fear around retirement isn't usually about being reckless or irresponsible. It's about realizing that the margin for error just got smaller. In this conversation, I want to talk through why $250,000 in retirement can feel so much scarier than people expect, and more importantly, what actually matters more than the number itself. Not in a hype-why way, not in a you should have saved more way, but in a calm, honest way that helps you breathe a little easier and maybe see your situation more clearly than you did before. There's something strange about numbers. They don't change, but how we feel about them does. At 35, $250,000 sounds like winning. At 65, it sounds like a tightrope. And that shift messes with people more than they expect. I've talked to retirees who remember hitting that $250,000 mark and feeling proud, genuinely proud. Years of saving, skipping vacations, driving the same car a little longer. It meant something. But then retirement actually arrives, or semi-retirement, or I'm working part-time but not really by choice retirement. And suddenly the question flips. Instead of asking, how much am I saving? You start asking, how long will this last? That's a completely different emotional experience. When you're working, your savings feels like a reservoir that's slowly filling up. Even if the market dips, you think, well, I've got time. Time is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. But once the income slows down or stops, the reservoir becomes a clock. Every withdrawal feels louder, more permanent. $250,000 divided over 25 years is about $10,000 a year. That math hits hard when you see it written out like that. And sure, Social Security helps, maybe a pension if you're lucky, but still, the savings is what fills the gaps. It's the cushion for surprises, and retirement is full of surprises, most of them not the fun kind. What makes this especially tough for seniors is that there's less room to fix things later. At 40, a mistake is a lesson. At 70, it can feel like a threat. So the fear doesn't mean you failed. It means you're aware. And honestly, awareness, even when it's uncomfortable, is better than blind optimism. Nobody really talks about this part enough. The emotional whiplash that comes from switching gears. For decades, your job was to accumulate, save, build, grow. Even when markets dropped, the advice was always the same: stay the course. But retirement flips the script. Now it's not about growth, at least not primarily. It's about protection, sustainability, predictability. And that's unsettling. Because growth is exciting, protection feels defensive, like you're bracing for something. With $250,000, this shift feels especially sharp. There's enough money to matter, but not so much that mistakes disappear. Every decision carries weight. Should you invest more aggressively? What if the market drops? Should you play it safe? What if inflation eats away at it? You're stuck between two risks, and neither one feels comfortable. This is where a lot of retirees start feeling anxious, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because the rules changed and nobody really explained that part. The goal is no longer maximize returns. The goal is don't run out. That's a psychological adjustment, not just a financial one. And it's okay if it takes time to settle into that new mindset. You're not behind, you're just transitioning. Here's the thing about inflation. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly rearranges your expectations. The grocery bill creeps up. The utility bill edges higher. The pay prescription copy changes. None of it feels dramatic in isolation, but together, it starts to nibble away at that sense of security. With $250,000, inflation feels personal. At 2–3% a year, money loses half its purchasing power over about 25 years. That's not a scare tactic, that's just math. So the fear is that your account balance will disappear overnight. It's that it won't stretch the way you assumed it would. This hits seniors especially hard because many expenses aren't optional. Healthcare isn't something you can just cut back on. Heating your home isn't a luxury. So when prices rise, flexibility shrinks. The good news, and there is good news, is that awareness lets you plan smarter. Even modest adjustments in spending, housing decisions, or investment mix can help offset inflation's slow grind. But pretending it's not there, that's what actually creates fear. If there's one topic that makes retirees go quiet, it's healthcare. Not because they don't want to talk about it, but because they've already thought about it a lot. Even with Medicare, costs add up: premiums, deductibles, vision, dental, hearing, prescription drugs. And then there's long-term care, the big unknown. With $250,000, the fear isn't just medical bills, it's uncertainty. You can budget for groceries. You can estimate utilities. But healthcare, that's a moving target. This is where a lot of the scariness comes from, not knowing what's coming or when. The important thing to remember is that fear thrives in vagueness. The more you understand your coverage, your options, and your realistic risks, the more manageable it feels. You don't need to predict the future. You just need to reduce the unknown. Living longer is a gift. It's also a planning nightmare. Nobody wants to plan for dying early, but planning for living a long time, that's tricky. With $250,000, longevity risk feels real. What if you live into your 90s? What if one spouse outlives the other by 10 or 15 years? That's not pessimism, that's reality. The fear here isn't about age, it's about duration. How long does the money need to work? How long do you need it to work? This is why pacing matters more than perfection. Sustainable withdrawals, flexible spending, adjusting expectations as life unfolds. Retirement isn't a straight line, it's more like a series of chapters, and the goal is to make sure the story doesn't end early because the money did. There's another layer to this fear that doesn't show up on spreadsheets. When work ends, income ends, but so does structure, identity, routine. For decades, the paycheck was proof that money would keep coming. Even if you didn't love your job, it was predictable. Retirement replaces that with self-reliance. Your savings become your employer. And $250,000 can feel like a nervous boss. This is where people start second-guessing themselves, feeling guilty about spending, feeling anxious about enjoying life. But money is a tool, not a test of discipline. The goal isn't to hoard it out of fear. It's to use it intentionally, in a way that supports the life you're actually living now. Someone always seems to be doing better. A neighbor with a bigger house. A friend who retired early. A headline about million-dollar retirement accounts. Comparison sneaks in and distorts everything. $250,000 starts to feel small not because it is small, but because it's being measured against unrealistic or incomplete stories. Most retirees are figuring it out as they go. Many are living on less than you think. Peace comes from understanding your numbers, your needs, and your priorities, not someone else's highlight reel. Here's the quiet truth. Security in retirement doesn't come from a specific balance. It comes from clarity, knowing your expenses, understanding your income sources, having a plan, even a flexible one. $250,000 with a clear strategy often feels safer than $500,000 with confusion and anxiety. The fear fades when the fog lifts. If $250,000 in retirement feels scarier than you expected, that doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're paying attention. You're noticing the shift from earning to sustaining, from building to preserving, from assuming to understanding. And that awareness, even when it feels uncomfortable, is what leads to better decisions and calmer nights. Retirement was never meant to be fearless. It was meant to be thoughtful, intentional humans. The money is just one part of the picture. How you use it, how you think about it, and how you adapt as life changes, that's what really determines whether those years feel tight and anxious or steady and livable. So if you're sitting at the kitchen table, coffee going cold, staring at that number and wondering if it's enough, take a breath. You don't need certainty. You don't need perfection. You just need clarity, flexibility, and a little grace for yourself. And honestly, that goes a long way.